Welcome. You'll notice that when you came in today that I greeted each of you and we did the friendship bracelet exchange because today we're here as friends. This is going to be a protected space where I'm going to share a little bit of my experience, but I want to welcome you to also share yours afterwards. So this is going to be a little bit of a shorter keynote just so that we have time to talk together. But with this time, I hope that I can inspire you to think a little bit creatively about harnessing your own mental superpowers in the fight for software quality justice. And by the way, this talk is called ADHD and Me, but it's not just for people, for anyone who wants to think more creatively about their own brain. So this is a little bit about me beyond what was in my bio. I'm Karen of Karen Test Stuff. I created the YouTube channel about software testing advocacy and who cares for the testers when we care for everything. I'm also cat mom to Liliana of the Dark Realms, mentioned Magic the Gathering later. We can nerd out about that a little bit more. And I like to describe myself as a chooser of joy in any situation where it's possible. Because even when you're in tough situations, there's usually an opportunity to learn from them. And you can make your life better in the future using that. So I find comfort, if not joy, in that. But I've got a few disclaimers that I need to get out of the way first. Like I said, the first thing is this is my experience. I'm going to be very careful to use I and my in this, because not everyone's experience is the same. We may have the same diagnoses, the same labels on us, the same challenges, but we're all going to experience those a little bit differently. So as I go through some of these stories today, some of this may be incorporated. Not all of it, because this changes every time I give it. But if you have any kind of personal experience where you may feel that you might be harmed by the mention of any of these topics, I want to make sure that you feel empowered to leave at any time. There's no judgment in this room, we're all friends, and I ask the rest of you to be patient with anyone who does need to leave. But if we're okay to move forward, I would like to challenge you to explore that discomfort at a later time at a place that might be a little more psychologically safe for you if you do need to leave. So with this being said, are we okay to get started? Okay, awesome. Each one of us has sparkles inside us, all shapes and colors. And just because my sparkles are a little different than yours doesn't make either of ours any less marvelous. Even if you don't have diagnoses to point to, you might struggle with some of the same challenges that I do. So try using some of my tools and tricks that I've developed through different things, and keep your brain open to new ideas, because something might be useful for you. This quote is from a song by the artist Aurora, and I internalized these lyrics that spoke to me and said that you don't have to make any changes to who you are to be loved, to be valuable, to have worth in this world, just as you are. And as I have made steps to grow closer to my true authentic self, I'm going to share with you a little bit about how I use those tips and tricks in my work as a software tester. But there's a thin line that a hero walks, my friends. You have a choice to make, whether to use your powers for good or become a villain. I want you to understand some of the filter through which I perceive my life as I address these superpowers by name and share my experiences with them. I need to be honest about some of the dark sides so that you understand what has caused me to develop some of these tools and tips. It's important that I define a few things before we move into how I use it in my work. So here's the squad. ADHD, anxiety, and depression have all been labels that have been given to me throughout my mental health journey in different points to help me understand more about the way that my brain works. Words hold power to me. They give me a focus, something to work towards. And I get frustrated when I'm running up against something where not only do I not have the answer, I don't even know what the question was in the first place. Understanding more about myself and hopefully the questions that drive me is something that I've just recently started exploring, although I've likely lived with these latent superpowers for ages. And it's not a straight line journey either. There are days of rest and there are days of progress. But let's take a look at each of these a little closer. ADHD, or Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, is the most recently labeled superpower that I possess. I was diagnosed as an adult female, which was a little weird for me because my personal bias when I think of ADHD, or when I thought of ADHD, was to think of like a rowdy young boy who can't sit still. That was just my personal bias. So when I heard that I might have this condition as an adult, it surprised me. My particular diagnosis points to the inattentive side, not so much the hyperactive side, so that's why it was a little weird for me to understand that as well. That means in a basic sense that I have trouble focusing on just one thing when there's a lot happening at once. And honestly, it doesn't have to be a lot happening, just more than one thing at once. ADHD in adults is being studied more widely, and as we have more conversations like this, these shared experiences that we have can start to come to light. And we start to learn more about the condition as we go. The dark side of my experience with ADHD has been that I've often felt isolated within my own chaos. When there's a storm going on around me, like when I lost my job, or when my marriage broke up, or when I'm in the midst of a depression, there's like a storm going on around me. And I know there are other people who are experiencing that storm because on a clear day, I can see you. I know that you're there, but in the midst of those situations, I have to rely on trust, and sometimes that's really hard. So because of this storm of chaos, there's also a lot of important things in that storm that are all juggling for the most important place. So it's hard for me to determine what's the most important thing to do, which I usually run out of time to do anything. So it's a form of to-do list paralysis when I have too much to do and I can't figure out what the most important thing is first. That leads to a high ratio of inception versus the completion of ideas, because I'm an idea person. I get really excited about things, and then I'm not so great with follow-through. I need an accountability buddy from my community. But that's just a small example of things that I deal with when I have this superhero in my squad. Next, we'll meet anxiety. Anxiety was a surprise to me as well. I thought everybody just worked until their heart gave out, working 2-3 jobs to make rent and just struggling to survive. When I got promoted into a management position, I thought it would get better, until I ended up in the doctor's office with a shoulder injury from aggravated muscle tension. At the same time, I was in the midst of a toxic and abusive romantic relationship, and trying to balance my personal dysfunctions with my career stress was almost staggering. But I finally sought treatment, and my doctor recognized that I was suffering a little bit more than what he would call a baseline. I struggle with using the word normal because normal for one person is very different from another person's normal. But the psychological terror that was caused by anxiety was exhibiting itself in real physical ways on my body, even if I refused to admit that it was real. But I listened to the experts and I started taking their advice. Started taking regular medication again. That helped me manage a little bit of the dark side, but really it only kind of took the edge off. Anxiety continued to rule my life for a number of years, culminating in situations like rejection-sensitive dysphoria, where if you're not familiar with that, it's, say you really want to do something really bad, you're real fired up about it, but you're afraid that someone will see you doing that thing and think that you're wrong or bad or even evil. And so instead of feel that feeling of rejection, you instead do nothing, which is another form of paralysis. You'll see that that's kind of a theme with me. Also, in the attempt to not feel those bad feelings, I'm obsessed with my past performance, rethinking conversations and challenges. Could I have done things better? Could I have said something better? Could I have Could I have reacted better? And then that causes me to over-engineer the future, taking what I've learned from the past performance and trying to make sure that only the outcome that I want happens. It doesn't really serve anybody to do that, but I did find a way to use that in my work here in a little bit. And last, we need to meet depression. Depression has been with me the longest and wasn't much of a surprise, to be honest. I was diagnosed with major clinical depression as a teenager after my first suicide attempt. As a young person, I didn't understand the control that I wanted to have over my spiraling life, and so I got very angry and hurt. But since my intense empathy has always been a part of me, I would never turn that towards someone else. So I turned it towards the only target that I had, myself. The dark side of depression is just what you think it is. But let me add a little more color to the darkness that comes to mind. Tired of being tired doesn't really cover it. Tired of this bland, colorless, dust-filled, gray plane of existence where nothing is ever good or real or pure. So why should I continue breathing? Gives a little bit more idea of the anguish. And when I'm so tired that I can't feel anything anymore, that's usually when the intrusive thoughts start. And those are the thoughts that tell me that I'll feel better if I feel anything, even if that something is pain, which can lead to self-inflicted harm. Some of this I've learned to control. Some of it I struggle with now. But I do know one thing, that if I can break that barrier of emotional isolation when I am at my absolute darkest, if I can find just one person to sit with me in that moment where I am, the worst part of the wave has passed. So that was a lot of icky stuff that we don't like to talk about or acknowledge because it doesn't make us feel very good. But I promise there's a point to this. This isn't just me going, woe is me up here. While I talk, I want you to kind of take some deep breaths here because a lot of people resonate with these things that I'm talking about. And if you're feeling big feelings about the things that I'm saying, you're not alone. And I'm going to say that again because it wasn't on the learning objectives. You are not alone. So many of us struggle with these things. Not every option is going to be a winner when you're on a mental health journey. Sometimes the therapist that you waited 6 weeks to see is awful. Sometimes the meds don't work. Sometimes you don't feel like you're getting any better. But like I just talked about, having those people who will sit with you in that space and tell you that it's okay to feel these feelings, that's an invaluable treasure. And today, like I welcomed you all as friends, I appreciate you being trusted friends in this space. You ready for the good stuff? Okay. So with each of these conditions that I've described, I've given you context for what I've experienced. Now let's talk about what I've used to help me work through these symptoms in daily life, and then how they apply to testing. So ADHD doesn't have to be, ooh, shiny thing. Do I enjoy a good shiny thing? Yes, we just talked about that. But have I also learned how to hold incredible eye contact with people through even the most stressful situations because I have practiced? Yes. So I've learned through therapy and coaching how to harness my coping mechanisms that I've used all through my life to work for something good. And hopefully, with some time, that storm of sticky notes turns into something a little bit more usable. Let's redefine some of these common behaviors that I went through with ADHD. That living in chaos that I was talking about, that teaches me how to do prioritization. Even if it's how to do it badly, I have to start somewhere. Practice makes progress. And being able to figure out the most important thing to do first is half the battle. People sometimes equate having ADHD to having a constant stream of questions running through your head. That's me, I do that, which is accurate if a little bit simplified, but it does give me an incredible opportunity to embrace my curiosity, to use clients that no one else thinks of, to try to test a legacy system in new ways. And then obsessive pattern recognition is another thing that I attribute to my ADHD, even though it's more of an obsessive compulsive tendency. But it's something that I embrace through not just technology in my work, but we've been using technology forever. We've been using it on our phones, on our computers, in our daily lives. So it's easy for me to feel when something is off. It gives me an eye for detail in my work because I know that if I'm trying to operate a text field, that it's supposed to work in a way that most of the rest of the ADHD. I have enough experience using technology in daily life to know when something feels icky because I sense a deviation in the market pattern. Because we've used this technology, we know what it's supposed to feel like, and when it doesn't, it feels off. So those are just a couple of ways that I flip ADHD to work for me. Next is anxiety. Anxiety does not have to be stuck in a corner, rocking back and forth, overthinking every problem of the world that I have no ability to solve. Uncovering the causes of my stress or the situations that trigger anxiety helps me separate more of the chaos into something that is a little bit more understandable for me. When I can understand the individual threads that make up the tapestry of life, it's easier for me to harness the possibility and make it work for me, turn it into something that is my life. And then I can rally my intense empathy and my injustice complex to be used for the good of more than just the people around me. I can make an impact in the world by showing consideration to others and making space at the table. So let's redefine some aspects of anxiety. The personal trauma that I've experienced gives me a unique insight into people who have shared those situations. I turn my personal trauma into intense empathy for others, to make sure that others have a voice, even when they feel like they don't. I will be a voice for them if they need it. Those invented scenarios that I was talking about earlier gives me great opportunities to create test charters, explore edge cases, give me a great basis to explore and ask what could go wrong. And while I'm looking for what's the worst that could go wrong, I'm doing risk assessment, which gives me, once again, great practice for doing it at work. Anxiety can be used as a resource instead of working against me. And then we come to redefining depression, which, I'll be honest, I still have questions. I keep saying that I'm going to update this slide, but I've realized something. Mainly that this is always going to be under construction for me. Depression is not something that I can just figure out with a magic potion. If it was, I wouldn't have been struggling in such a dark place for the last few months. There are a lot of big changes that have happened in my life over the years of abuse and trauma that the world inflicts on all of us. But I'm not alone. Once again, there's a bunch of you out there that probably feel the same way that I do. You're looking for anything to get you through to the next morning. I'm with you. And I'd like to encourage you to do something for yourself. Find a reason, any reason, to wake up tomorrow. Join a card league, play disc golf, hug a tree, and I'm not saying that just flippantly. Seriously, go hug a tree. Get outside. No one's going to love you more than you do. Shake up your pattern, find a reason to live, because no one's going to give that to you. That's the work that you have to do yourself, and it is hard sometimes. But part of the journey is finding that out for yourself. It's part of the healing process. But the most important thing to remember here is that growth still happens when we're broken, and it can be beautiful. So what do we do with these newly determined superpowers that I have been able to make use of? As an additional little disclaimer here, none of the following is intended to replace the advice of medical professionals or for you to compare yourself against. This is purely for you to see how I have reframed my internal dialogue about myself. Here's my new squad. Same members, new look, even depression. Because I'll count progress as positive gain. Let's take a look at some example scenarios that showcase a strength that I flex with each superpower. For our first scenario, imagine you're exploring a system that you've explored 100 times before. There are existing bugs that developers are working on, but no new features to test. So I'm going to do some exploratory testing. Now, there's a heuristic in testing that you're not going to find the new bugs if you test the same system the same way over and over. You're never going to find new stuff. This is where my ADHD superpower shines. I channel all those invented scenarios I was talking about earlier, add in a little bit of the risk assessment on what's the worst that could actually happen, and then start there. I also use personas, because if you have trouble coming up with a way to test or explore a system in a certain way, you can try doing it as someone other than yourself. When I was talking about those invented scenarios earlier, I also have invented adversaries in those scenarios, where I'll take an angry person and turn them into a customer. How would they interact with the system? What would I do if I was upset with our system? My curiosity helped me find a bug in an existing system recently, because like I said, I never use the same client twice in my testing. I know a lot of my friends have lists of people that are good for certain scenarios, which is great for saving time, not so much for finding the unexpected. When I picked a random client the other day, it ended up returning an error with the way our data set was returned. Trying to figure out how to word this without saying what exactly we were doing. We had a list that would come back that had a change date and a start date. And when we made the call, we didn't determine which date should be structured for the display. And so it was displaying the wrong things and then taking off other things in our system that were wrong. But that bug had been there since day 0. No one had found it before. And I love finding stuff like that. That's what gets me out of bed in the morning. So even legacy systems have new opportunities for testing when I channel my ADHD superpower. In the next scenario, we've got an update for how the business is going to show the company's profit versus loss to the user. They're going to use red and green numbers, respectively, which follows regular design patterns that we would expect. But I know someone who can't tell the difference between green and red text. They have a version of color vision deficiency, so they wouldn't be able to use that piece of the system. Like I said, I've got a major injustice complex, so when people can't use something that other people take for granted, it makes me so upset that I can't even speak. When I personally have a relationship with someone that's unable to access something, it makes me very upset, but there's an easy way to fix it. Because based on the presented designs, I would just advise that the business find another way to notate the positive and negative values, just with using a positive and negative sign, or maybe an appropriate column heading in a table of data, or maybe use a pattern on a bar graph instead of color. My personal context in this scenario became a partner with that intense empathy that I feel. I was motivated to speak up when I saw an issue that wasn't top of mind for others. This all drives me to promote the prioritization of accessibility in our software and increases the quality of our products overall. I know I said I'm still working on this one, But here's something that I have learned. How and when to use my energy and limited resources. Over the last year, I've had to make a lot of hard decisions about where I can spend my limited energy resources. When so much of my recent life has been determined by big, hairy decisions, I don't have a lot left for me. When I have the ability to focus on a goal that really gives me purpose, I start to feel better about saying no to those things that don't serve that purpose. It's still uncomfortable, but it gets easier with practice. That allows me to focus my energy where I can feel it can do the most to drive me forward, and then rest when that energy is gone, because rest is important. So imagine we've got a scenario where we've got 14 tickets to go the night before release, and there's no way that I'm going to be able to test everything, but I have to test what I can test. And so, like I was talking earlier, when I was presented with challenges like this scenario, I once again call on my risk assessment from before, but add to that a new dimension, the dimension of spoons, which, of course, we know spoons. I don't have one to hold, but if you're not familiar with the term when it's referenced in mental health, it's popular in the mental health community to kind of quantify the amount of resources or energy or ability you have to complete tasks. So when I wake up in the morning, if I have low energy, I might quantify that in the form of 2 spoons. But I know that in order to get ready in the morning, I need to take a shower, brush my teeth, and eat breakfast. That's 3 things. So I have to make a choice. Now, knowing what I know about myself, I know that if I eat breakfast, that might fuel a little bit more energy for me later on. And so I choose to eat breakfast and brush my teeth and cross my fingers that I get another spoon to shower later. So now that we know what spoons are, I can look at the tickets that I have in front of me, rank them with risk, and then pick up what I feel like I have the ability to accomplish with the spoons that I have that day. And anything else that doesn't get done, it's gonna be there tomorrow. So through the stories that I've shared today, I reframe my experiences into something that can be constructive in the software battle for software quality justice. How the flurry of activity in my brain provides fuel for my creative test scenarios, even in systems that have a long history. It turns out being scared of everything actually helps fulfill a deep desire within me to help others, especially those who have shared my experience in some way. And living within the highs and lows of depression gives me the tools that I need to plan measurable goals, not only for testing, but for my future, to make my life better. But my outcomes that I've shared today are not guaranteed, because you're responsible for taking control of your mental health. At the end of the day, you execute the actions that influence your life. I choose every day to make this my reality, not some fictional metropolis with epic battles of good versus evil in the skies overhead. And some days it's easier than others, but I choose to feel joy. I choose to learn. I choose life. I choose to celebrate in the light of possibility ahead of me instead of cower in fear at the potential for doom. But it is a choice. Every time. You are the one who must live in your brain. You have the power to make it a comfortable place to be. What will you choose? Thank you. I'm not quite sure how questions work because Chris isn't in here. If you do have any questions, this resource here is a great place to start. Open Sourcing Mental Health is an incredible tech resource that has guides and definitions and starting points. That is a great place to research. And if you have any other questions, I'm happy to talk with you as well.